Christopher Nolan is about to put the oldest adventure story in the Western canon back on the big screen. Before you see his Odyssey, it's worth having the real thing in your head, the story Homer actually told, all the way to its bloody homecoming. So the pictures here come from NBC's 1997 miniseries, still the most complete screentelling of the poem, but the story we're following is Homer's. And Homer's version is stranger, crueler, and better built than its reputation. The defining trait of a hero is usually strength. The defining flaw of a survivor is pride. We are looking at the foundational text for every story about a man who believes he can outsmart the universe. Christopher Nolan is tackling this ancient blueprint in his upcoming film. To understand what he will build, you must understand the bones of the story he is adapting. This two-part miniseries lays out the narrative in strict chronological order, drawing a straight line from the fall of Troy to the shores of Ithaca. Homer constructed the original poem quite differently, starting in the middle of the action. The original text uses flashbacks at the Phaeacian court to recount the monsters and the magic. The linear approach of this television adaptation makes the cause and effect of the protagonist's suffering undeniable. Odysseus does not just get lost at sea. He stands on a cliff at the ruined gates of Troy and screams at the sky. He claims he conquered the city using his own intellect and needs no gods to guide him. That single shout serves as the inciting incident of a 20-year nightmare. The sea god Poseidon decides to remind a mortal king exactly how small he is. The journey home begins with a fleet of ships and a victorious army, but the sea strips Odysseus of every symbol of his power. The monsters he faces are not random encounters in a fantasy role-playing game. They function as divine instruments of humility. Take the encounter with the Cyclops, a brute force obstacle that Odysseus defeats through pure cunning. He smuggles his men out of the cave by blinding the giant and tying them beneath the bellies of sheep. It is a tactical victory that he ruins with his own ego. The ship sails away to safety, but Odysseus refuses to be an anonymous victor. He stands at the prow and shouts his true name to the blinded monster. He hands Poseidon a specific target. The sea god ensures the waters between Troy and Ithaca become a gauntlet designed to break a king. The crew opens the bag of winds just as the shores of Ithaca appear on the horizon. The gale blows them far off course. This is the tragedy of proximity, punishing the men for their lack of discipline and Odysseus for his failure to lead. Odysseus loses the last of his men to the dual horrors of Scylla and Charybdis. He is reduced from a triumphant general commanding an armada to a solitary shipwreck survivor clinging to a piece of driftwood. The physical punishment takes a severe toll, yet the true psychological breaking point occurs in the underworld. Odysseus travels to the realm of the dead and finds himself surrounded by the ghosts of his fallen comrades. He also sees the spirit of his own mother. She died of a broken heart while waiting for a son who never returned. This is the moment the narrative shifts from a survival story to a reckoning with guilt. Odysseus sees the devastating collateral damage of his prolonged absence. He understands that his survival means nothing if he loses the people who anchor him to the world. The narrative contrasts this painful mortal reality against the sterile temptation of eternity. He washes up on the island of Ogygia, the domain of the nymph Calypso. She rescues him, takes him as a captive lover, and offers him the ultimate escape from mortal suffering. She offers him immortality if he will remain with her on an island paradise forever. This presents the ultimate test of his core values. Odysseus rejects her offer, stating he would rather spend one single moment in his mortal wife's arms than live forever without her. The story argues that eternity is meaningless without the friction and fragility of human connection. The gods force Calypso to let her captive go. She's left alone and grieving, a tragic figure trapped in an endless existence, while Odysseus builds a raft and sails back into the storm. While Odysseus battles monsters and gods, a completely different kind of war rages in his own home. Ithaca is occupied territory. Arrogant lords have descended on the palace, devouring the king's wealth and pressuring Queen Penelope to declare her husband dead and choose a new one. This domestic siege mirrors the epic sea voyage. Penelope operates far beyond the archetype of a passive damsel waiting for a savior. She fights a war of attrition, using time as her primary weapon. She promises the suitors she will choose a husband as soon as she finishes weaving a burial shroud for her father-in-law. Every day she weaves, and every night she unravels the threads in secret. Her steadfast loyalty is the anchor that pulls Odysseus across the ocean. While he learns humility, she demonstrates the sheer endurance of mortal faith. The suitors discover her ruse, accelerating the timeline for her forced remarriage. The tension in the palace reaches a boiling point, just as her son comes of age. Telemachus grows from a helpless, grieving boy into a young man living in the shadow of a legendary ghost. In Homer's original structure, the first 4 books focus entirely on him, a sequence known as the Telemachy. The miniseries intercuts his growth with his father's journey, showing Telemachus stepping up to challenge the chief tormentor, Antinous. The boy seeks out news of his father and prepares to fight for his stolen inheritance. The convergence of these 3 character arcs forms the climax of the story. Odysseus reaches the shores of Ithaca 20 years after he left. The man who screamed his name at the sky in Troy does not march up to his palace and demand his throne. The sea has taught him the value of restraint. Athena disguises him as a lowly, ragged beggar. The king walks into his own home and accepts insults, mockery, and physical abuse from the men eating his food. This marks the completion of his internal arc. He endures extreme humiliation to achieve his goal, proving that his fatal flaw of hubris has burned away. He meets Telemachus, revealing his true identity to his estranged son. The reunion is brief, pragmatic, and armed to the teeth. The 2 men prepare a trap for the occupying force. The narrative tension breaks during a contest of strength designed by Penelope. She declares she will marry the man who can string her husband's legendary bow and shoot an arrow straight through 12 axe heads. The arrogant suitors fail entirely. They cannot even bend the wood to string the weapon. The disguised beggar steps forward, asks for a turn, and strings the bow with terrifying ease. The arrow flies true, and the disguise drops. The ensuing massacre is not a glorious battle. It is a brutal, systematic execution. Odysseus and Telemachus lock the doors and slaughter the suitors, cleansing the palace with blood. The violence is absolute, but the story does not end on a pile of corpses. The true climax is a quiet conversation between a husband and a wife. Penelope is cautious, refusing to trust the stranger covered in blood who claims to be her dead husband. She tests him by ordering a servant to move their marriage bed into the hall. Odysseus erupts in anger, revealing the final secret. He built that bed himself around the roots of a living olive tree, making it impossible to move. It serves as the ultimate symbol of their marriage, rooted in the earth, unmovable, and known only to them. Penelope breaks her stoic facade, and the 2 find their emotional reunion. The king reclaims his identity, his power, and his home, doing so as a man who understands his reliance on the divine. The unresolved threat of vengeance from the suitors' families looms over the horizon, but order is restored to Ithaca. The Odyssey operates as a brutal examination of the cost of arrogance. It demands that its protagonist lose everything he values before he is allowed to earn it back. The physical journey acts as a delivery mechanism for a psychological breakdown. The monsters operate as mirrors, reflecting the deadly consequences of a mortal trying to play God. You now know the complete architecture of this story. You understand the thematic weight of the bow, the shroud, and the olive tree. When Christopher Nolan's adaptation arrives, he will make his own choices about how to frame this ancient violence. We will break down every single change he makes, scene by scene, so subscribe to be here for it.